Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you to our today's webinar. My name is Magda El-Sherbini, Middle East and Islamic Study Librarian at the Ohio State University Library. I am the host of today's webinar on preserving the history of Kuwait through the oral history and documentation project at the American University of Kuwait. The speakers will talk about their project to collect oral histories, documenting the social impact of oil discovery, the invasion of Iraq, and the 1991 Gulf War. Before proceedings, I would like to acknowledge our sponsors of this event, the Ohio State University's International and Area Study Department, the Middle East Center, and the Near Eastern and South Asia Language and Culture Department at the Ohio State University. I have a few housekeeping items to share. Audio and video will be muted for all attendees. Please submit your questions to the A&Q box and use the chat for general comment and discussion. And now I would like to introduce my colleague, Melinda McClemens, Assistant Professor at the Office of International Affairs and Middle East Center. Melinda will introduce our speakers and moderate the session. Melinda, it's all for you.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. And I'm going to quickly introduce our guests, our honored guests, and then allow them to dive into this content that they have so kindly gotten ready for us today. Asma El-Kanan is the University Librarian at the American University of Kuwait, AUK. She's been involved with libraries for more than 17 years, 11 of which she has been leading the library operation and initiatives at AUK. Abdulaziz Al-Mahmid is the coordinator for the Oral History and Documentation Project at the American University of Kuwait. He joined the project in November of 2021, and he feels quite lucky to listen to people's stories for a living. How wonderful is that? So just a quick reminder, I'll be looking at the Q&A. So if you have questions, be sure to put it there and feel free to use the chat for general comments or, to just kind of chime in. But I won't look at the chat. I'll look at the Q&A and do my best to get to everyone's questions when our guests are done speaking. Thank you so much. And I'm going to hand it over to our speakers.
Thank you, Melinda, and thank you, Magda, for hosting us. We are really pleased to share about our project with you and have this kind of exchange. So I will start with some background information about our university and our project, and then Aziz will share more interesting information, perhaps, and stories from his experience working on this project. The American University of Kuwait, AUK, was founded in 2003 as an independent, private, co-educational liberal arts institution of higher education, which is based on the American model of higher learning. It has now 3 colleges and a student population of about 2,500 students, more or less. The library serves the entire community and supports the university's research and educational goals. And I'd like to start also by saying that we've seen interest in oral history at AUK since 2007, and it all started in the classroom. Students of history and international relations had a senior capstone course project whereby they had to conduct oral history interviews on certain topics, and the purpose was to enable them apply the methods and of research and analysis acquired in the history and international relations program. So they conducted interviews to research, for example, the American perception of the Middle East, Arabs, and Islam, and also to research Kuwaiti perceptions of America and the West, and also local perceptions of the Kuwaiti development. The transcripts of these interviews were published in print volumes that are now available in our library for students and scholars seeking to understand the different perceptions or to conduct research on these topics. So then the idea was developed further by the Gulf Studies Center later in 2015 through its former director in order to establish an oral history project beyond the walls of the classroom. The center at that time invited volunteers from among our faculty and staff to serve as interviewers and offered them training by an oral historian from the British Library. The plan back then was to launch and run a pilot project to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the invasion and liberation of Kuwait, and to collect interviews, documents on different themes relating to the 7-month occupation and its aftermath. And as a result, we had some interviews that were conducted. And then in 2018, the project was officially housed under the library. The library saw that as an opportunity to demonstrate its value and support to its community, whether the university community or the larger Kuwaiti community. And the aim was to create a major archive for the study and public understanding of Kuwait's history and society through the recording and transcribing of an in-depth life history interviews on various topics related to Kuwait's history across different time periods. And the initiative was supported by Kuwait Projects Company, KIPCO, which continued to support and sponsor the project for its importance in preserving the history of our nation. So at that time, we had a staff member assuming full responsibilities of the oral history and a couple of interviews. And with the support of our sponsors, freelancers were recruited, whether interviewers, transcribers, or translators, because we decided that each interview will have to be transcribed and translated so that users can have access to the text in Arabic and English, and that interviews should become available to non-Arabic speakers. So setting up the project required many things, such as recruiting team members, training, equipment, budget, preparing some legal documents and forms, administrative support, and development of an online platform or technical infrastructure. It was actually challenging since no other institution or library in Kuwait has developed similar projects. So there was generally little knowledge and expertise in setting up oral history projects in Kuwait. And there were initiatives here and there by certain individuals on social media, but not on the same level or on professional platforms. So it was a lot of work until the project was officially launched to the public in a press conference in 2020, with 6 live history interviews published online. And from there, we continued to conduct interviews. And I think with that, Aziz will talk more about the details of the project. So I'd like to turn it over to Aziz.
Thank you so much, Asma, for the introduction, and a big thank you to the Ohio State University for hosting us and inviting us to speak about our project. My name is Aziz. I'm the coordinator for the Oral History and Documentation Project at the American University of Kuwait. I'd like to start by talking about why such a project is important in Kuwait. As you may know, there are differences between written traditional history, or what is termed quote-unquote traditional history, and oral history. Traditional history is usually written from the point of view of power or someone close to power, and the historical experience is then projected and universalized onto all segments of society. And it follows that traditional history usually concerns itself with the concept of power and transfer of power. So it is usually about systems of government, wars, revolutions, political movements, and so on. So much is lacking when it comes to traditional history, like, for example, daily life and other aspects of history that are not usually documented by traditional history. Oral history seeks to document, among other things, daily life. And through daily life, we can monitor and observe the transformations that happen or take place in a given society. So our project seeks to conduct life review interviews. So when we conduct oral history interviews with individuals, we do cover the entirety of that individual's life history from their birth until the current moment. Usually, what we come across as two major, public history events that had their, effect on society. These are usually, in our interviews, the exportation of oil in 1946 and the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait in 1990 and the Gulf War and the liberation in 1991. We try as much as we can to interview, the older generation, people who have witnessed the discovery of oil, the exportation of oil, and the transformations that happened in society. Now, keeping that in mind, the project did start with what is termed the Pioneers Project. The idea was to interview individuals from different fields and different backgrounds. And these individuals have been major contributors to their fields, or they were first-hand witnesses of certain historical events. A few come to mind. For example, we have an interview with Sarah Akbar. She worked in the oil sector during the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait. She worked heroically to preserve the archives of I think it was the Kuwait National Oil Company or Kuwait Oil Company. We have interviews with other people. Abdin Al-Saib, for example, he's the oldest narrator we have interviewed. He was born in 1928, and he does remember the Jewish community living in Kuwait because there was a Jewish community and then they migrated, and he did mention them and talk about them. In addition to that, we also would like to expand the project. So it used to be we interview pioneers, but we also feel like we have this ethical responsibility to also document the histories of minorities that have been living in Kuwait or that do live in Kuwait. We have noticed, for example, that everyone we interview remember Palestinians in Kuwait very fondly as people who contributed positively to the progress of Kuwait. And upon further research, I did come across, for example, the fact that there were 380,000 Palestinians living in Kuwait before the Iraqi occupation and the liberation of Kuwait. And I remember coming across a book by Dr. Shafiq Al-Ghabra. He's a political scientist in Kuwait. He conducted oral history interviews with Palestinians in the 80s who have been living in Kuwait. He does mention an interesting trend that after the Nakba in 1948, usually people migrate from less developed areas to more developed areas for better opportunities, jobs, and stuff like that. But Palestinians actually migrated from a more developed place to a less developed place, which is Kuwait. And the first wave was professionals like teachers, doctors, and so on, engineers. So yeah, we came up with the idea of also conducting an oral history of the Palestinian diaspora. We tentatively call it the Palestinian Memory Project, and we intend to work in that direction as well, in addition to what we have already been doing. Now, when it comes to the process of conducting oral history interviews, first we identify a narrator that we would like to interview. We give them a call. There is a lot of convincing that goes into it. Because I feel like in Kuwait, for example, since the Oral History Project at AUK is the first organized oral history project, I feel like we don't have the culture of oral history in Kuwait. Perhaps in the UK or in the US, oral history is taught in schools, and people might be more or less familiar with it. But in Kuwait, for example, when we contact a narrator to conduct an interview, they assume that they need to be an authority on public history for them to be interviewed and talk about history. So we explain to them that this is about your individual history. We want to listen to your story. And then we go and conduct the interview. We use the Zoom recorders, H4n. Usually we conduct the interviews over multiple sessions. We prefer not to go beyond 2 hours per session, so that neither the narrator nor the interviewer experiences, fatigue or they feel tired. And then at the end, of course, the narrator would sign the release and restriction forms. And then we do audio or digital editing. We do indexing for the interviews. And then we assign the interview to be transcribed and then translated. And all of these are audited and checked. So far, we have only been doing audio recordings. We feel like an audio recorder can be forgotten and during the interview process and within the interview setting, and both the narrator and the interviewer both relax and feel comfortable in the setting itself. But we are open to experimenting with video recording in the future as well. Now, having done that, having conducted the interviews, we also upload them to our online archives, which is the website that we have, which Esma will talk about later on. But we also feel like there is this ethical responsibility to give back to the community. We like to follow the precept of, as we take from the community, we need to give back to the community. And to be realistic, we don't expect anyone from the general public to, for example, go on the website and listen to a 6-hour or a 10-hour long interview. So we thought of, setting up an oral history exhibition in Kuwait in collaboration with the Contemporary Art Platform. We thought it would be nice to, set an exhibition for people to visit and interact, and also invite the narrators for them to see their lives represented and for people to also interact with the narrators. The idea was to, have audio devices with handsets, and people would visit the exhibition. They would remove the handset, play a segment, an audio recording of one of the narrators telling a story that happened to them during the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait. We had the entire exhibition revolve around that time period, the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait. I actually have a few slides that I can share if you give me just a second. Okay. I hope everyone can see. Okay, so this was the poster or announcement for the exhibition that we held in collaboration with the Contemporary Art Platform. We titled it Voices from the Occupation, the Unearthing of Memory and History Through Storytelling. And this is one angle of the exhibition itself. So we have the audio devices set up or mounted on the walls. And around the devices, we have posters. Each poster corresponds to one of the narrators we interviewed. We had photographs from the narrator's personal archives, so that people who come to the exhibition would see photographs with captions pertaining to different life periods of these narrators. So they see these narrators in their full humanity and listen to the audio recording of them telling a story or an anecdote of something that happened to them during the invasion. This is the exhibition from another angle. And these are people interacting with the audio device, listening to snippets from interviews. Each snippet was about 2 minutes long. These are also visitors to the exhibition. And this is the oldest narrator we've interviewed, Mr. Adin Sayegh. As we mentioned, he was born in 1928. There was also an accompanying cultural program to the exhibition where we invited First, the team of the oral history team was interviewed so that we talk about oral history, we explain what oral history is, so that we provide people with a context for the experience they're having in the exhibition. And then we also conducted interviews with a few of the narrators. So we interviewed them live on stage about their experience during the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait. We also opened up the floor for questions from the audience. We also had artifacts displayed also from the narrator's personal possessions. But we also wanted to benefit the AUK community at large, the students, faculty members, staff, everyone. So we also set up the same exhibition at the American University of Kuwait, and this is the exhibition taking place at AUK. We set up the posters on panels, and we also ordered stands for the devices. And this is one of the stations with the posters and the audio device. And this is a student interacting with a poster and a student listening to a snippet of an interview. I'll stop sharing now. And okay, just give me a second. Okay. Yes. So this is when it comes to the community outreach. We also, when we set up the exhibition at AUK, we collaborated with certain professors and instructors to have their students visit the exhibition, and they were actually very excited to do this. Some of them even integrated the exhibition into their students' assignments and had their students engage with the exhibition. We also sometimes collaborate with the English department and on internship classes. So we also teach our students how to conduct oral history interviews. They gain skills from oral history interviewing, and we gain interviews also, and potential interviewers that can be recruited for the project. The Oral History Project also participates in other events held at AUK, like open houses and the library open houses and other activities. This concludes my part, and now I hand it over to Asma once again so that she speaks about the platform.
Thank you, Aziz. Because oral history involves lengthy audio interviews, it would be really difficult for anyone to find a certain part of an interview without audio segmentation, time coding, and indexing. We had to think of the most effective way to present the content and make the recordings accessible. And so we had to consider the best options or tools for labeling, time coding, and accessioning the recordings. We decided, after research, of course, that the system that best serves our needs is the OHMS, or OMS, which was developed by the University of Kentucky Libraries. It is an oral history metadata synchronizer that enhances access to oral history interviews. And it consists of the back-end application where interviews are indexed with time codes and metadata are created, and a viewer, which is the user interface that is visible to the user. So the site was built by integrating OMS into Omica, an open source platform for web publishing. So both are open source and free to use. And that saves us actually a lot of cost, and we feel it is much more sustainable. And now I think I'm going to show you the end result. So let me share my screen. So this is the main page. It includes a gallery of all interviews conducted. And so far we have 24 interviews online. Most of them are in Arabic, but we have 2 in English. 11 of the Arabic interviews actually were translated from Arabic to English, so you can find also transcripts. And if you click on any interview, you would see the time-coded subject index. And if you play any of the segments, you would see the text connected to the corresponding moment in the recording. It's very easy and straightforward. Again, if you want to look at the full transcript, you can just click on transcript or switch the button towards the transcript to view the full transcript. And if there is translation, then you can switch between the original language and the translation by clicking on switch to, you know, the language you intend to have. And last year, we developed the Arabic interface because when we launched the project, we launched it with an English interface, but then we thought that since the project caters to the public and Arabic is the main language here in Kuwait, and most interviews have been conducted in Arabic, we thought that it's an obligation to have the site, you know, published in Arabic as well. So we worked on an Arabic interface, and now you will see a switch on the top of the page where you can switch between the Arabic and English pages. We've also implemented a gallery tab for each interview in order to include photographs and documents that we collect from the narrators. So we upload these photographs with captions whenever applicable. This is, for example, a collection of photographs from one of the narrators in that particular interview page. And I'm gonna show you some of the photos that we've collected and that we have online. This photo was taken in 1991 after the liberation of Kuwait. It shows life gradually going back to normal in the traditional souk Mubarakiyya at that time, and it was taken by one of the narrators. This one shows a visit of the Women's Cultural and Society and Social Society in Kuwait to Abu Dhabi to explore women's activities in the United Arab Emirates. I believe it was in the 70s. And this one shows Sarah Akbar with a group of women inspecting an oil fire on the 15th of October in 1991 after the liberation. This is one of the narrators. She's an artist, and it shows her participation in the World Festival of Youth in Berlin in 1973. And this is a photograph of Walid Rajab, also one of our narrators, with the Boy Scouts in Kuwait in 1969. This is also an interesting photo of one of the narrators with Jamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt in 1965. He was with a group representing the Kuwaiti Trade Union Federation at that time. And Hamza Ulayan, again, one of the narrators, who's a journalist, and the photograph shows his visit to the oil fires in October 1991. So these are I think all the photographs I wanted to share. And I think that's all I wanted to cover. And with that, would be happy to receive your questions. So I'd like to turn it over to Melinda.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, we have a couple questions. I'll just start with the first one that was entered and go in order. So this one is from Elizabeth Plants, and she says, I'm interested in knowing if you have been able to collect oral histories from non-Kuwaitis. I know many of them experienced the Iraq invasion differently than Kuwaitis. Do you seek out participants who now live outside the country? Thank you.
The answer is yes. We do interview Kuwaitis and non-Kuwaitis, but unfortunately, we don't have the means to seek narrators who live outside of Kuwait currently. We prefer to do the interviews in person, but we are also open to conducting interviews online.
Okay, and this is from Afif Arabi. What forms of expansion are you contemplating, and how will this expansion support the preservation and documentation of Kuwait culture and cultural changes?
As we mentioned, the original project was to document the life histories of pioneers in Kuwait. We are seeking to expand in terms of documenting the histories of minorities in Kuwait, whether they are ethnic or religious or migrants. But to be honest, currently we lack the manpower. We are understaffed. So we are hoping, we recently conducted an oral history training so that we would recruit freelance interviewers so that we can expand in these different directions.
And you mentioned you started with pioneers. Could you just explain what that means exactly for those of us who aren't as familiar with Kuwait?
Okay, so Kuwait is, let's say, a recent state. When Kuwait first started, the development started to happen in the 60s. So there were many opportunities for people to start working in media and politics and economy. And so, yeah, we sought out individuals who have been very influential in their fields in their own ways.
Okay. Oh, that's totally makes sense. That's helpful. Thank you so much. Okay, this one is from Priya Manon. Thank you for the great presentation. Your archive is going to be immensely helpful to a lot of us working on the cultural aspects of Gulf migration. Could you throw light on two questions? One, have you documented any narrations from migrant workers from South Asia, perhaps the largest segment of population in the country? Why or why not? I'll just start with that one. We can go to the second one.
Yeah, unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that yet. As I mentioned shortly before that, we are understaffed. But this is something we have in mind, hopefully going forward.
Okay. And then secondly, she asks, could you share any material that you may have come across from migrant workers in Kuwait that typically gets occluded in formal histories of the place?
Yeah, it's not part of my personal research, so I have nothing to share when it comes to that. Apologies.
Okay, and she says, thank you for all your efforts on this very relevant project.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah. Okay, and this is from Kauthar Fakhra. How much guidance do you give the narrators during interviews? Is it a conversational process, or do you try to give the narrator as much agency as possible? So I guess those are two questions.
Yeah, what we do is that we give the reins of the interview to the narrator. What we do is that we have, for example, an interview guide, and the interview guide simply covers different life periods and suggestions for questions that we can ask. But what we do usually is that we let the narrator tell us what they think is important to them. So we try as much as we can to keep our questions open-ended. They tell us what is important to them, and our follow-up questions, stem from the answers that they give us.
Excellent. And this is from Thawrat Al-Olaimi. There are several awards for heritage preservation. Do you have plans to participate in the UNESCO Jikji Award this year, or the ICCROM Award in Sharjah, United Arab Emirates? Do you have any similar awards in Kuwait?
I have never thought about this, but maybe Asma has something to say about this.
I think there are similar awards by the National Council for Arts, Letters, and Literature here in Kuwait, but we would be happy to participate and apply for the awards in Sharjah or by the UNESCO once we read more about them and their requirements. We didn't feel confident at the beginning because we wanted to work on the content and make sure that, you know, everything goes through certain improvements, and it is really well presented to the public, but would be happy to participate, and thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this one is from Fahad Bishara. There are similar endeavors around the Gulf. To what degree is there coordination between your project and others like it, such as conferences, symposia on oral history?
I think that these are separate projects, so each project is being run by a particular group or institution. So we are not kind of like connected, and I'm not aware of certain activities that connect all these projects. But we do keep an eye on the important projects on oral histories here in the region and in the Gulf. And we also have a list of them to kind of, you know, look at where they are and what they are doing, and to perhaps connect in the future.
Okay, and this is from Mariam Mutawa. Can you brief how consent and copyrights are considered in this project, either recordings or archival images?
Right. Actually, as I mentioned in the preparation for the project, we do come up with certain legal forms, like the consent form that the narrators will have to sign. They will have to agree on publishing these interviews and to transfer the rights to AUK to publish these interviews. And we have also a statement on our website about the rights and permissions. So we feel that that is very well covered. But this project is intended for the public, so we share it publicly and openly. Everyone using the project will have to cite AUK for that, but otherwise it is open access.
Also, I would like to add that during the interview process itself, we do ask for verbal consent on the record at the beginning of the interview, at the beginning of every session, actually. We do mention to them that there is a consent form, a restriction form, and that they need to be signed. We explain what these are, and at the end of the interview, we have them signed.
Excellent. So this is from Nada El Mutawa. My question is about fact checking in oral history. How do you do that? Did you document the experience of medical teams who stayed during the invasion in hiding?
When it comes to fact checking, we believe, based on the theory in oral history, that maybe sometimes a narrator says something that might be historically incorrect, but it might not be a historical fact, but it may refer to other facts like psychological or metaphorical. So it is not our job to, at least during the interview, session itself, we do not try to establish the facts. At the same time, I consider myself to be an oral history interviewer and more of an interviewer than a researcher. So after the interview, I don't do fact checking. We leave that to researchers. If researchers are interested in using the qualitative data that we produce, they can do the fact checking themselves. And when it comes to the medical teams who stayed during the invasion, we haven't been able to do that yet.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So this is from Imane Abdullah. Hello, I'm Imane Abdullah from American University of Beirut. Thank you for sharing your interesting project. I would like to ask if the photos are part of oral history. Oral history is not limited to interviews. In other words, is oral history not limited to interviews?
The reason why we collect photographs from narrators, it actually started with the preparation for the exhibition that we set up. So we decided going forward that we would collect photographs from the narrator's personal archives in case we would like to set up another exhibition in the future.
Okay. And then this one is from Layla Mustafa. Thank you for conducting this important interviews. How did you choose your participants for the interviews? Sorry if you already mentioned this during your talk.
Sometimes we actively seek certain narrators because we know of their involvement when it comes to a certain historical event, or we know that they contributed immensely to a certain field and we want to interview them. But we also do snowball sampling. So sometimes we interview someone and they make a suggestion and they actually get us in touch with someone we would be interested in interviewing.
Okay, awesome. And this is from Tharwat Al-Olaimi. Could you please mention again the open source software you use for the website?
Yes, we used the OHMS by the University of Kentucky, and we integrated that into Omeka.
All right. And OHMS stands for Oral History Metadata
Oral History Metadata Synchronizer.
Synchronizer. Okay, cool. Now we have from Kauthar Fakra. Do you strive to find commonalities between the narratives from different sources on the same topic? Or is the goal to find as many unique perspectives as possible?
What we prefer to do is we follow a grounded theory method when it comes to interviewing. So we go into the interviewing process without expectations or hypotheses. Whatever comes up in the interview comes up. We do find commonalities. We observe that, we notice that, but we do not actively seek commonalities or uniqueness of narration.
That's interesting. Okay, so this one is from Rizwan Karim. Thank you for a brilliant presentation. We're working on a similar OH project, oral history, sorry, but with a community spread across 28 countries that speaks around 20 languages with their own set of significant language events. Glad to see that we're more or less on the same page. In addition to exhibitions, what other forms of outputs are you planning? Accessible write-ups, podcasts, short videos could be a way to go.
I think the opportunities are, there are a lot of things that we can do with the content, starting from the classroom to university activities to public talks, media, videos, audio. So we have a lot of possibilities, and we plan to engage the community, whether the university community or the Kuwaiti community at large. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
That's great. Okay, and then this one is Afif Arabi. To learn from your experience, what are the challenges you have experienced and what measures might you change or introduce to the documentation process?
What stands out in my mind personally is convincing people to the interview, because as we mentioned previously, that I feel like we lack the culture of oral history in Kuwait. Whenever we approach someone, they feel like they need to be an authority on history so that they would grant the interview. Yeah, that's the only thing that comes to mind.
I think also we find it a bit challenging to find translators and people who are interested to join the team and conduct interviews, because this is something really new here, and we don't have expertise available. So Aziz tries to conduct workshops from time to time to train a group of people and have them join the team. But when it comes to translation, because interviews are so lengthy, sometimes we don't find people who are willing to translate on freelance basis. So challenges of that sort, I think. And there are also other challenges, but that's what comes to my mind right now.
I have a question. Is there one particular pioneer that stands out to you, and can you share one of their stories?
Actually, yeah. I mean, they all have unique stories. They all share unique stories. But something I was speaking with Asma about the other day is Al-Farouq Abdulaziz. He's an Egyptian international movie director and producer who lives in Kuwait. I remember when I asked him about the day of the Iraqi occupation, if he remembers what he was doing and how he received the news. So he told me, yeah, I woke up, I received a phone call. I was told that the Iraqis entered Kuwait. And he was like, but let me take you back to the year 1978. And he told me stories that happened to him with the Iraqi authorities, because he used to be sent by the Ministry of Information in Kuwait to represent Kuwait in cultural events there in Iraq, and pick movies to be screened on Kuwaiti TV. So what comes to mind is what we read, for example, in the literature, that public history does not have to correspond to individual history. So to him, I feel like the occupation happened way before the actual occupation, you know? So I found that to be quite interesting. And there are many, many other stories that we come across that are quite fascinating. And we feel grateful to have the opportunity to document them for posterity.
Do you think people will have a better understanding of the occupation if a body of research is developed from this and people hear these stories, more importantly?
Definitely, yeah. Not only that, I feel like, you know how there are many advantages to conducting oral history and documenting oral history. To me personally, I feel like what matters the most is the stories themselves. When we, for example, interact with the students, they tell us we only heard the stories that our families told us because they did not live through, they weren't born when the occupation happened. So they're very fascinated to hear other stories by other people. Yeah, so I feel like as long as we're doing the documenting, anything can follow from that.
And then we have another one from Elizabeth Plants. She says, how many interviews do you have that are not appearing on your webpage?
Sorry.
I think about 6. Am I right, Aziz? These
I'm
are
not
still
sure.
under processing, so.
Yeah, we have a few in the backlog that we're working on processing.
All right. Well, I think, are there any other questions or anything else you'd like to share? Okay. In that case, I'm going to hand it back over to Magda El-Sherbini, our head librarian of the Middle East and Islamic Studies collections and libraries.
Thank you very much for a brilliant presentation. And thank you, Melinda, first. Really, you did a very good job, and all of you did very good job, and I appreciate it very much. And I would like to let everybody knows that this webinar will be recorded, and it will be available to you. If you register to this webinar, you will be getting an email with the recording, and it will be hosted on YouTube. Just last final thing to thank everybody participated in this webinar. Thank you, Christina, for putting things together. Really, that was wonderful help. Thank you, Melinda, very much for moderating the sessions. This was really very hard to, I've been trying to keep my eye on the question and I failed in forwarded to you, but it worked very well. I hope to see you again in the next step of your development of the oral history. And that's really will work like a model for other libraries to follow. I appreciate your time and thank you.
Thank you so much, Magda, Melinda, and Christina. It was wonderful to join you today and speak about our project, and I hope that we answered all the questions that everyone had. So thanks for hosting us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for hosting us. Thank you, Melinda, Magda, and Christina. We are honored and flattered to have been invited. It has been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.